So you've got WINScp, right? This is a secure FTP file transfer program, right? So you just save the file off as you would with anything else. So WINScp is just a really good way. It will work with your PPK certificate that you've already got. All right? Yep, or 5.13. Right? And then you just go ahead and you install it like you would any other software. You use this in 2.16. No. Now, here's what I'm going to ask you to do, right? There's two panels, left and right. One for local, one for remote. A lot of people will really find this a lot easier to work on. Commando is actually a really good way of doing this because you see your hard drive on the left and the remote hard drive on the right. If you go with the Explorer interface, you only get the remote one. All right? So I'm going to highly recommend for ease of use, because you've never used this software before, right, that you use the Commander interface. All right? You do not want to include any of their other fun, happy horseshit. All right? So make sure that you don't get any of the extra bonus stuff. You want WINScp 5.13. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Commander. You want to be able to see local and remote at the same time. All right? All right, and then after that, you just want to go ahead and launch WINScp. This is a good thing. Sweet. All right. So just like using PuTTY, right? Just like using PuTTY, your host name, your username, your password, but this is where you put your private key. All right, so you've already got your PPK private key. This will work great with Linux systems, and Linux only unless you turn on an SFTP server on your Windows that you spun up earlier, right? So you have to remember, on Linux, the service is already started and ready to go because you have SSH, right? They work on the same port. And the Windows side, it's a little bit different. You actually need to run and install the SFTP service. But there's a way around connecting to Windows, right? So if you've got this, you can now get to your Linux box and drag and drop files over. So if you have install packages, if you have stuff you want to do, if you have websites you need to drag and drop over, right, this is the best program that you've got to do this in. Kind of make sense? Maybe kind of, sort of? All right. Okay. So I want you to go ahead and log into your console. And this is where things get a little bit interesting. So today we're going to work with storage. All right? So we're going to be working down here in the red zone. Red, evil. So they put storage under evil. I like that. All right. So is everybody all logged in? Okay. Everybody else logged in? Okay. If you go down here, you're going to see something called S3. All right? And S3 is basically just a huge bucket, and feel free to click on that. Okay? So S3 is just basically storage. It's a great big huge bucket where you can put stuff in. All right? So you'll notice I have one directory in there, and it's called cftest static. All right, so this is a static bucket that I have up and running. And inside of that, I'm hosting a bunch of VMDKs. I'm hosting a bunch of virtual systems. All right? So if you're part of PRCCDC, this is where I put all your images so we can spin them up in the cloud, right? What I want you guys to do is stay in the root. So you go back to S3. And I want you to create a bucket. Right? Don't call the bucket walrus. Don't call the bucket where's my bucket. Right? I would like you to use the following naming convention for your bucket. I'd like you to use your name, first and last. Right? Not your login, not Wally999. Right? But the reason why I want this is because we're going to be working with this bucket a lot, and there's going to be stuff you're going to be putting into this bucket. I need to know who the student is as we kind of go through this. All right? So to create a bucket, we just click on Create Bucket, bucket name, you can spell, all right? Region, US Standard. You can choose a region if you want, right? But we're just going to go with US Standard. But if I was Netflix, I would make a bucket that says Netflix Oregon, Netflix West, right? I would put a bucket in Oregon, Northern California, and U.S. Standard, which is Virginia. But right now we're just going to work in the Virginia data center, right? So we'll just go U.S. Standard. Now here's something that people forget to do. You'll notice there's 3 buttons on the bottom. Set up logging, create, and cancel. All right? I want you to set up logging because people forget this, because this will stop a lot of stuff from happening, right? So you want to enable logging. Your target bucket, I want you to be cftest static if you guys can get to it. It should be wide open to everybody. Your target will be your initials, underscore, right? That way I know who the student is, because we're going to log everything that happens with your bucket. Why do I keep on thinking of a walrus? Or is that really old, too old a meme? So can everybody see cftest static? Okay. Huh? It was an old meme, probably older than dirt. Back when Mythbusters was really popular, and the guy with the big furry mustache. Oh yeah. Yeah. Walrus buckets, and then it just took off from there, and people got stupid because 4chan and Reddit got their hands on it. All right. So is everybody good? Everybody here? All right. I want you to click on Create. Your initials, and then underscore. And what do I do? What, where? Am I going with the bucket I just created or the static? You're creating a bucket. Your target bucket is going to be cftest static, and then your target prefix is going to be underscore. Yep. All right. So you notice on the right-hand side, there's a whole bunch of stuff, right? So you have things like permissions, right? And you can add, delete, or add specific policies to a bucket. So really kind of important thing to remember, right? You can edit permissions. So if we want to add more permissions, right, we can give everyone the ability to do something. We can do authenticated users. We can do log delivery, me, or some guy named dmoral, right? So if we give everyone edit permissions, that means everyone can write to that bucket. This is a bad choice, right? But we do want to give everyone view permissions to that bucket, especially if we're going to be providing content to the public. We want everyone to be able to view what's inside that bucket. Make sense? All right. If you want to add a specific policy, you can click on, I don't know if everybody saw that. You can click on this Add Bucket Policy, right? And then you can choose either the policy generator, which is really simple, or you can choose the sample bucket policy. So let's just go sample, and you can kind of see what they put up here and that everyone can do stuff, right? So you have the effect is allow, right? That's going to be the wrong SID for us. So this is an example of what a policy looks like. Or you can do the policy generator, which is going to be really easy. So if we choose an S3 bucket policy that we want to allow demoral, or actually, yeah, because I'm the principal, S3 actions, we want to be able to abort an upload. We want them to be able to, I don't want them to delete anything. I don't want them to read. I want them to be able to get the policy I'm writing. I want them to be able to get to the website that we're going to design. Right? So those are all the things I want them to do. So 3 actions were selected, right? Amazon resource name, right? Hold on. I know you guys have got questions. Let me just kind of go through this. All right? You can just copy this. All right? Your bucket name. Is demoral, or Dan Morrow, because that's what I put in there. And then my key, right? The key is the name of the key that you're using, right? So you all named your key something specific, you know, like Andrew or Joe or Bob or Dan or whatever, all right? And then you can add the statement to this, right? And then you can click on Generate Policy, and it will show that policy for you. And then you copy it, and you can paste it in there. This is if you want to do a specific policy for the bucket, right? Right now we don't know enough about what we want to do with this bucket to actually do this, but I wanted you to see the 2 ways of going about it and actually being able to generate a policy. So how many people generated a policy? How many people then pasted it into their S3 management? Good. How many people need me to do that again? All right. What you got? All right. So what we want to do is we want to add a bucket policy. All right. So what we want to do is we want to add a bucket policy down here. Everybody got that far? Your screen's black. Thanks, Paul. Okay, so add bucket policy. All right. Sample bucket policy is going to be just that. You have to configure it for yourself. Sometimes it's easier to have the policy generator do things for you because you have a limited amount of information. So if you click on the AWS policy generator, right, this guy over here, it will take you to this page, right? Select policy type. We want a policy for an S3 bucket. We want to allow someone to do something. The principal is your account name, right? So for me, it's demoral, right? For you guys, it's what you want it to be, right? If we do all services, then we're giving them permission to everything. All we really want to do is just give them permission to the S3 bucket. There's a number of actions that users can do, right? We want them to be able to abort a multi-part upload. So if the upload takes too long, they can go ahead and cancel out, and I won't waste space on my hard drive, right? It will basically roll back that entire upload, right? We don't want them to create or delete anything, right? But we do want them to be able to get the payment. Oh wait, sorry, strike that. We want them to be able to get to the policy so they can see if they're allowed or not, right? We want them to be able to get to the bucket website, right? Because we can actually build a whole website off of this, right? And then that's all that they really want to do. One of the things that you're probably going to notice too is get object torrent. Remember that I said Amazon Web Services is a built-in BitTorrent nirvana, right? If you want to allow people to BitTorrent or torrent your material, then you would go ahead and do get object torrent, right? That way they can just go ahead and use whatever peer-to-peer file transfer system that they want to use to actually get to this file, right? And then if you want to do an ARN, you really just want to kind of copy this off, right? paste it in, and it basically ARN, AWS S3, so it kind of gives you a route to follow down, right? Whatever you named your bucket, all right, and then whatever the name of your PEM file is, your key, all right. The first part is your bucket name. All right, you're going to have to hold on. All right. All right. So your bucket name and then your key. All right. Then you want to add the statement and then you want to click on generate policy. All right. And then this is the policy that you generated to control how people interact with that bucket. So you can do Control C to copy it and then go back to your management console and paste it in. All right? Yes. Yeah, and if you screwed up the name here, you can actually edit it here, because I know I chose absolutely the wrong name for my key. Right? All right, and then you can save it off. And then you can, all right, invalid principal policy. Yeah. So it doesn't know who Dan Morrill is or D Morrill is. It has no idea who I am. So again, there's some information that we need that's not good to go. So we can just close that off, but that is one way to add a very specific policy to your system, right? So you're going to, what? Go Control C, or go Control A, go Control C, copy everything, then go back to your other window, paste it in. All right, and again, if you error out, just go ahead and delete it and close it, because there's information that we need before we go in there. But I wanted you guys to actually see a bucket policy. All right. Okay, so everybody got that. There's a couple other things we need to do. Static website hosting. You can host your static website entirely on S3, and this will save you some money. All right. Your endpoint, my actual website then, is this URL. So if I go and I click on that, it will say 404 not found, because I don't really have anything in there right now, right? It's an empty bucket. But if I want to, oh wait, right? You can put wow, where'd all my stuff go? Oh man, where'd my bucket go? All right, actions, properties. There we go. All right, so if you lose the page, just highlight your bucket, go to actions, and then go to properties. It'll bring up your properties if you kind of lost it. So static website hosting, you can do this, and this would be your endpoint once you start putting up your index paging and all the rest of it, right? So you can do this fairly simply and easily, right? It will make a really easy way of doing stuff. You have to turn it on, right? If you enable website hosting, that's okay. If you redirect all requests to another host name, you have to be really, really careful of perpetual loops, right? Because if you want to put content for your website on S3 and you redirect it back to your website, someone goes to your website, will try to grab something from S3 but then get redirected back to your website, the page will loop infinitely and will either not load or will throw up a warning saying this page cannot load normally because of the looping. Okay? So you really want to test this out first. But this is one of the reasons why the Google hacking works so well, right? Because we have Amazon AWS 1, right? So it kind of makes sense. So right now we're not going to enable, but I want you guys to be aware of that. Logging. Logging is your next big one, right? You want to make sure that every action that's taken on this is logged, right? And this is the security, compliance, the whole 9 yards deal with this. If anybody accesses it, uploads, deletes, modifies, or changes something, this is the only way you're going to know if something happened, right? Notifications. Do you want this bucket to notify you via cell phone every time it feels cranky? All right. The bucket can do that, and you can actually set up rules for this, right? So we would have to turn on SNS to make this work, but you can actually get the bucket to send you a warning if something's going on with the bucket. And this is generally a handy thing if you're a system administrator. So you can spam your system administrator whom you love with messages every time someone uploads something if you really feel like it. And on a dynamic bucket where things are uploaded and deleted all the time, they'll maybe get a couple 100,000 messages an hour. Yeah, so you can be evil. Life cycle, right? You can manage the life cycle of objects and have them automatically removed once they're no longer valid, right? So if you have a data retention policy of 90 days, you can set your bucket up to have that same data retention life cycle. And you can delete anything automatically older than 90 days. So this is kind of cool. The bucket's self-maintaining. But you can set this up to whatever your data retention policy is. So kind of a cool thing. Tags, if you want to tag the bucket, right? So you know what your cost allocation is. So you can actually tag it with my name. So I know that Dan's costing me this amount of money, right? So this is a good way when you get a breakdown of your cost report. Who's the person that's costing you the most money? Requester pays. You can actually have someone else pay for the bucket inside your organization. So you can actually split the bill like you do around lunch when you're out with all your buddies, right? You can actually split the bill for your bucket, which is actually really kind of neat. And then versioning. You can actually go and version your bucket. So if you're Netflix, you can actually have Netflix version 1.11, 2, 2.0, 3, depending on how movies roll in and roll off. If you're Hulu, same way, right? So if you had a license for that movie for 2 years, and you put up a life cycle that this object has a 2-year thing, right? And that I'm going to keep a backup of it over here in version 1.0 without a life cycle in case I can renegotiate that thing. Even if my life cycle happens and you don't have to transcribe and transcode that movie again, you just move it over from the earlier version bucket, move it back in, and give it a new lifetime. So this is how companies comply with licensing. This is a really good way of complying with licensing, right? So if you have or are renting or are using movies, music, video, or anything else like that, you can actually version out for the contract length, for access, who gets access, how is it paid for, and what is the life cycle of that particular object within the bucket. So this is a kind of neat way of meeting a lot of compliance issues. So kind of cool. Make sense? Sure? All right, so if you double click on your bucket, you're going to see something called upload, create folder, or actions. Right? Really, once you get started, all you can really do is upload something or create a folder. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a folder called test. So everyone should have in their bucket a folder called test. And then click on the little check mark to make sure that this is awesome. All right. Then there's a little box right there. If you click on that little box, it's going to give you a whole lot more actions that you can take with it, right? So you can actually go into the properties for that bucket and see the details, and you can change things around. You can encrypt your bucket, and this is a good thing. If you're worried about other people coming along and reading your data, I highly recommend that you encrypt your bucket. There's a computational overhead. You kind of sort of pay for it, but not really. It's almost a shared cost in a lot of ways. So if you're really worried about people accessing your stuff and bypassing your authentication stream like you can with going in through the back door, right? Just encrypt your bucket. It's really that simple. If you want to have it as a storage class, standard is what everything S3 is. It will stay there until you delete it. If you want to do reduced redundancy, right, then that changes how your data is stored. If it's reduced, it's not going to worry about anything in terms of making any kind of backup or anything else, right? There's no redundant extra protection within the whole S3 bucketing system. So usually I just keep storage classes standard, right? And again, if you're really paranoid, encrypt that bad boy. It's there, you can use it, all right? The other thing you can do too is you can make this folder public. And it's going to warn you, are you absolutely darn sure you want to do this? Because if you make it public, that means anybody and their monkey can come through and do this, right? And it will go through and then make your folder public. Make sense? Then the next thing is upload. If you have a whole lot of stuff that you need to upload into your bucket, it's easier and more cost-effective to actually ship your drives over to Amazon and have them do it. If you have if you are incremental in how you do this, right, then using this kind of upload is actually fairly makes sense, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to add a file. And what I want you to do is go into your downloads directory, and I want you to upload the WINScp installation that you guys just downloaded. All right. So you have this all set. If you go on set details, you can actually do this per file. All right. So per file you can encrypt, you can do how you want to store it. Okay? You can actually then go click on set permissions. You can make everything public, you can grant full permissions, or you can make specific permissions on a file-by-file basis. So there's really fine-grained control when you're doing stuff with your bucket and your files in it. And this matters a lot, right? It's a lot of overhead, right? But if the individual is the person that's uploading this file, then you're kind of like in a little bit better shape. The person who owns the data should be able to set their own permissions on who can access the data, right? So you can kind of spread this out with your folks. You can actually set metadata, so you can figure out content type directly, or you can actually add what's called metadata. Metadata makes it a lot easier for people to find things or for the system to do its job. So if you say that the content type is an application, right? And it's not, it is an application zip, right? It knows what to do with it, right? If you add more metadata and you give it cache control, how is it going to be cached? How will that be controlled? Will you allow me to cache it, yes or no? Content disposition, it can be an attachment. Expires is a really good one. It will expire on 03/31/2013. So if I have software that is often upgraded, right, you can actually set it to expire on a specific date. And then you can start the upload. Depending on your bandwidth at your corporation or at your house, what I'm finding out is that anything over 25 gigs is actually better just to collate everything onto a hard drive and then ship the hard drive off to Amazon and let them do it on their internal network, because you don't pay for that. All you're paying is for the shipping, right, and the cost of the hard drive, because you will not get that hard drive back. If you use the internal IP schema. If you use the external, oh, you pay. Right? But if you use the internal, you don't. All right? And that's kind of what we're seeing with things like Hulu and Netflix, right? Is that it's really difficult for them to move the big, bulky petabits of data from point A to point B. So what I would do personally, if it was me, is I would have my main system here at my company, and then send the hard drives out to East and West Coast, and then do the incremental uploading, right? But it boils down to Netflix's and Hulu's business model. How much is the cost differential, and what is it worth, right?
What would say if I just wanted to start my own account with AWS and use that as a file backup?
I absolutely encourage every single one of you to sign up for your own account on AWS because you're students. And students usually get their first year of AWS for free, as long as you stay in the micro tier 1 and don't like turn it into a BitTorrent server to rival the Pirate Bay, right? But this is it. But this is how I had planned originally on doing all my stuff from China, was to actually do exactly what we were talking about: build out a bucket, use WINScp, and move stuff over. The only problem that I didn't expect is that in China they actually block Amazon Web Services, right? I didn't expect that. So I actually had to go through and then set up a drop point in Malaysia, which isn't blocked, and then get everything back up into Amazon that way. So I had to go kind of round robin around the firewall, right? Malaysia wasn't blocked, but Amazon was.
Or do you have an idea of how much 25 gigs cost?
I think it's like 10 cents a gig, 4 cents a gig, somewhere in there. And that's reasons why you see companies like Carbonite, right, are able to offer that really cheap, or Dropbox are able to offer their free tier, is because the cost of storage is so dirt cheap. Dropbox, Carbonite, all the rest of it rely on exactly this, right? You're automatically created an encrypted folder for all your stuff, and you just back it up, and you're just limited by the bandwidth coming out of your house for Carbonite or for Dropbox. So this is essentially, and this is why S3 is actually a really good thing to use, right? It kind of will help you get through the day and kind of help you out a little bit. Make sense? You guys comfortable with S3 buckets? All right. Now, when you're done with your bucket, right, when you're done with your bucket, buckets, down, properties, right? So everybody understands how to do this whole bit, right? Everybody's comfortable with transfers, so you can actually see what you've transferred up? All right. With your bucket highlighted, if you click delete, are you sure you want to delete the bucket? That will do the same thing that Linux does, which gives you a really good idea of what the operating system is underlying this whole thing, right? The bucket you tried to delete is not empty. Please delete all the objects in your bucket. And this is where power scripting comes in handy, right? You can't do rm -r star on this. And it's a pain in the butt to go through and actually do this by hand. But I've got a handy script that will allow you to mount your S3 bucket in Linux, or there's an application in Windows that will allow you to go through and control the bucket without having to go through this whole rigmarole. So you can use the power rm -r star and all the other things to go along with it, right? So as long as you loaded something up in there, it won't delete the bucket unless you go through and rip out each piece hand by hand, which is an administrative nightmare and a half, right? So kind of makes sense? All right, everybody comfortable with buckets? All right, so go clean out your bucket, delete it, make a new one. Yes? Yes, it's your bucket. You tell it what you want to do with it. Right. Can you speak a whole lot louder for me? Yes. No, the grantee demoral is me. So if you're trying to grant permissions on my bucket, you'll fail. You're going to want to be granting permissions on your bucket.
But that's not my bucket. Is it default like that?
It will, because you're underneath my master account, but you really want to control your own bucket. You don't want me to control your bucket, so you'd want to change demoral over to your crypto key and to your name. All right? Because you really don't want me to control your bucket. That would be bad. Because you don't know what you'll find up there. Next thing you know, you'll find copies of Horse and Hovercraft. All right, any other questions? I know you've got a ton of them, so I'll come over and help you out there next. But are we pretty good? Are we comfortable? Clean out what's inside your bucket, delete it, make a new one. Up. Huh? It will take a while to delete stuff, depending, because we have a whole bunch of people working basically in the same namespace. Right? So we'll take a minute. Any other questions? Are we good? Are you happy? No. All right, good. I want more buckets. Actually, I need to show you that name. So it was a complete images for the bucket. So apparently the walrus really had this thing for buckets, right? He loved buckets, and everyone kept on stealing his bucket. And it was a really huge meme, like maybe about 100 million years ago, back when the dinosaurs roamed the earth, right? So that's why people who are of my generation hear the whole bucket thing. They just can't help but think of the walrus in the background. So this is what we use to remember stuff. I'm sorry about that. I'll stop now. All right.